Once upon a time in a faraway land, there stood a grand towering castle. The castle was surrounded by a magnificent garden, filled with the most beautiful flowers anyone had ever seen. The trees in the garden bore the juiciest fruits, and the grass was as soft as the finest silk. The garden was a paradise, and every afternoon, the children from the village nearby would come and play there. They would laugh and sing, climb the trees, and enjoy the warmth of the sun on their faces. The garden belonged to a giant, who had been away for many years. He had gone to visit his friend, the Cornish ogre, and had stayed with him for so long that the children had almost forgotten about him. The giant, however, was not a kind or gentle creature. He was a selfish giant, and when he finally returned to his castle and saw the children playing in his garden, he was furious. "What are you doing here?" he roared, his voice booming like thunder. The children, terrified, ran away as fast as their little legs could carry them. "This garden is mine," the giant said to himself. "No one else is allowed to play here. I will build a high wall all around it, and I will put up a notice that says trespassers will be prosecuted." And that is exactly what he did. The giant built a high, cold wall around the garden, and he put up a large sign that read, "Trespassers will be prosecuted." The poor children had nowhere to play. They tried to play on the dusty road, but it was hard and rough, and they missed the soft grass and the sweet-smelling flowers of the garden. They would wander around the high walls, hoping to catch a glimpse of the beautiful garden beyond, but the walls were too tall, and the gates were always locked. Without the children, the garden became a sad and lonely place. The birds no longer sang in the trees, the flowers forgot to bloom, and the trees themselves withered and grew bare. Only the snow and the frost were happy. "Spring has forgotten this garden," they said, "so we will live here all year round." So the snow covered the ground with a white blanket, and the frost painted the trees silver. The north wind came and howled through the garden day and night, and the hail danced merrily on the roof of the castle. The poor giant could only look out at his cold, desolate garden and wonder why the seasons had turned against him. As time passed, the giant grew more and more miserable. No matter what he did, the garden remained trapped in eternal winter. The flowers refused to bloom, the trees bore no fruit, and the grass stayed brown and brittle. He was all alone in his castle, with nothing but the howling wind and the bitter cold for company. One morning the giant was lying in bed when he heard a beautiful sound. It was the most delightful music he had ever heard. A bird singing outside his window. Spring must have finally come, he thought, and he jumped out of bed to look. What he saw took his breath away. The children had somehow found their way back into the garden, through a small hole in the wall. They were playing beneath the trees, and the trees were so happy to have them back that they had burst into bloom. The flowers had opened their petals, and the grass was a brilliant green. The birds were singing, and the sun was shining brightly in the sky. The garden was alive once more. Only in one corner of the garden, winter still lingered. A little boy was standing there trying to reach up to a tree branch, but he was too small. The tree had covered itself in snow and frost, and its branches hung low and bare. The giant's heart melted as he watched the children play, and he felt ashamed of his selfishness. "How selfish I have been," he thought. "Now I know why my garden has stayed cold and barren. It was because I kept it all to myself, instead of sharing it with the children." He hurried outside, but as he approached, the children saw him and were so frightened that they ran away, leaving the garden cold and silent once more. Only the little boy in the corner did not run, for his eyes were so full of tears that he did not see the giant coming. The giant gently lifted the boy and placed him in the tree. Immediately, the tree burst into bloom, and the birds began to sing once more. The little boy threw his arms around the giant's neck and kissed him on the cheek. The other children, seeing that the giant was no longer angry, came running back into the garden, bringing with them the joy and warmth of spring. "From now on, this garden will be yours," the giant said to the children. He knocked down the wall he had built and threw open the gates, inviting the children to come and play whenever they wished. The giant's heart was filled with happiness, and the garden became a place of joy and laughter once more. The children came every day to play, and the giant played with them. But the little boy whom the giant had helped never returned. The giant missed him terribly and would often ask the other children if they had seen him, but no one knew where he had gone. Years passed and the giant grew old and frail. He could no longer play with the children, but he would sit in his chair and watch them with a smile on his face. The garden was always filled with the sound of their laughter, and the trees remained in full bloom, even in the winter. One winter morning, as the giant sat by his window, he noticed something extraordinary. In the farthest corner of the garden, the same corner where he had once helped the little boy, there was a tree covered in delicate white blossoms, even though it was the middle of winter. Its branches were golden, and beneath it stood the little boy, whom the giant had not seen for so many years. The giant's heart leaped with joy, and he hurried out into the garden. As he approached the boy, he noticed something unusual. The boy's hands and feet bore the marks of nails, and his face shone with a light more radiant than the sun. "Who are you?" the giant asked, trembling. The little boy smiled and said, "You once let me play in your garden. Today, you shall come with me to my garden, which is paradise." That afternoon, when the children came to play, they found the giant lying peacefully under the tree, his body covered in white blossoms. He had passed away, his face filled with the peace and joy he had longed for. And the children knew that the giant had gone to a place where he could play forever in a garden far more beautiful than any they had ever known. This story of The Selfish Giant, by Oscar Wilde, beautifully illustrates themes of redemption, generosity, and the joy that comes from sharing and caring for others. It's a timeless tale that teaches the importance of love, kindness, and the transformation that can occur when one opens their heart.